Researchers who set themselves the task of investigating such baffling phenomenon have long observed that those instances in which human beings, animals, and such inanimate objects as stones, pottery, and buildings are transported from one place to another are among the most puzzling of all paranormal occurrences. Yeah, I'd say that's pretty weird. They said animals and inanimate objects like stones, pottery, and buildings. I could see how animals might transport from one place to another. They're not going to communicate to us where they're going. They're just going to go. But buildings? I want to hear the story about a building being transported from one place to another. I mean, that's interesting. Does all the plumbing go with it? I mean, that's so weird, right? Like, I don't know. That's structural shit, man. Anyways, author Harold T. Wilkins once commented that mysteries such as instances of teleportation should serve as a reminder that the physical universe holds surprises for those who rashly predetermine that all natural phenomena may be summed up in mathematical equations and neatly listed in a textbook. That was a long sentence. To scientists willing to consider the as yet unknown, teleportations stand as a challenge to research in a field with no less real and potentially fruitful than atomic energy. Wilkins has retold an account of an eerie case of an interrupted teleportation that occurred in Bristol, England on December 9th, 1873. Okay, let's keep it in the 20th century. Can we just keep it in the 20th century, because going back to the 1800s, 1700s, they used their imaginations a lot more back then. That's all I'm saying. Anyways, in this instance, an elderly couple who identified themselves as the Thomas Cumstons, I guess that's how they referred to themselves. The woman just assumes the guy's identity, I guess. They told authorities an incredible story of being nearly sucked into a hole in space. Hey, any hole's a good hole, right? The Cumstons had been staying at the Victoria Hotel across from the railroad station, preparatory to a visit to a seaside resort. At 3 that morning, they had been awakened by a terrible noise in their room. The floor seemed to split and open, and their cries of terror seemed to be strangely repeated and re echoed. Okay, I think we're getting into a building thing. I was just asking. I want to hear about a building being transported. Well, let me not jump the gun. Let's continue. Thomas Crumston fell down and began to vanish in the mysterious hole in the floor. Mrs. Crumston got hold of her husband's arm and began pulling him to safety. We screamed, Mrs. Crumston told the authorities, yet each time our screams were most horribly re echoed. I said to my husband, "Take out your pistol and fire it." He fired it into the ceiling, yet the terrible noises continued. Okay, it's 3 in the morning, and this guy just gets sucked into a hole in the floor. Yeah, because it said the floor seemed to split and open. And then this guy just had his gun on him. Did he sleep with his gun? Maybe he was a real gangster. I don't know. Let's continue. In desperation, the couple fled by way of the bedroom window, dropping the 10 feet to the street below them. They hurried to the railroad station, where they told the night superintendent that they had escaped from a den of thieves and rogues. Okay, that's a not what happened, but let's continue. Bristol police authorities searched the Cumstons' hotel room, but could find nothing that could in any way account for the elderly couple's bizarre tale. When they interviewed the landlady, they obtained her comment that she had heard some strange noises coming from their room, but that the sounds were of a nature beyond her experience. Yeah, the way people talked back then, it's just, it's so romantic, isn't it? The Cumstons were considered respectable people of good social position in their home city of Leeds. So, they were dismissed in charge of their attorney, and it was recorded in the official accounts that the couple had suffered most remarkable kind of collective hallucination. I mean, look, they were an elderly couple. You know, I mean, they were in good social standings, but dude, your brain when you're at that age, even when you're younger, you don't know about we didn't think about mental illness like we do today. It wasn't as studied, I don't think, back then. But let's continue. Harold T. Wilkins observed in his retelling of the strange tale that it becomes impossible to explain the strange noises and the hole in the floor, unless one assumes that under certain conditions an unknown force operates which is able to create a vortex in solid matter. It should be noted that the matter is solid only relative to human perceptions. On the atomic level, it may be described as mostly empty space. A human being drawn into such a vortex or whirlpool may be deposited in some spot dozens and even thousands of miles from its starting point. So I think it's referring to like wormholes and stuff. And yeah, like everything's only solid relative to how we perceive it, right? Man, this guy was on some good stuff, man. As we have already noted, things as well as people may be drawn into these weird vortexes and transported to other places or other dimensions. In 1968, an elderly Maine resident wrote a letter to the Bangor Daily News on the Main Street column, which told of a barn that totally disappeared during a rainstorm. Okay, now we're getting the building. According to Henry Davis, the incident occurred during the month of June 1924. He remembered the day well because he had driven to school to pick up his children so that they would not be drenched in the heavy rain. About a mile out of the town of Monson, where the Davies lived at the time, there stood a large farm building known locally as Sprague's Barn. The barn had been constructed of heavy, hand-sawn timbers, and it stood in the midst of a large field. The next morning, the residents of Monson were astonished to learn that the huge barn had completely disappeared. Although some people worked on the theory that a tornado had suddenly swooped down and picked up the large and sprawling building, the twister hypothesis seemed weak when it was noted that not a single shingle or bit of timber lay anywhere in the area. Letter writer Davis went on to state that even though construction has been quite heavy in that area during the past 60 years, no one has ever found a single board, nail, or implement from Sprague's barn. Frank Edwards, popular storyteller of the unusual, summarized an account of a vanishing Eskimo village for his book Stranger Than Science. According to available records, the 30 inhabitants of the village on the shore of Lake Anjakuni had been going about their mundane daily tasks when they simply disappeared, leaving the Northwest Mounted Police with the most disturbing unsolved case on their hands. Okay, I want to go back to this barn theory though. So I was wondering about the plumbing, and it looks like barns, I guess, don't have plumbing, so they got away with that one. But if there was a tornado, there's a strong possibility that it may have just gotten swept away and transported somewhere else. Maybe it went to the land of Oz. Okay, back to this. The unsolved case on their hands. Pots of food hung over dead fires. Ivory needles protruded from garments that were in the process of being mended. Kayaks lay battered and neglected at the lake's edge. Highly prized rifles stood beside the doorways of the empty huts. 7 dogs lay dead of starvation where they had been left tied to trees, and, perhaps most baffling of all, a fresh grave had been opened and the body had been removed. Man, this town, this little village, I guess they had some enemies because they even took the dead out the ground. That's crazy. That's what I'm thinking, at least. I mean, it was only 30 inhabitants of the village. That's not that much in the grand scheme of things. Anyways, in the far north country, a man never leaves the camp. on a journey of any consequence without taking his rifle with him. A dog is valued as highly as a fellow human being and is as much a part of the journey as his rifle is. As far as the empty grave is concerned, desecration of the dead is unthinkable to an Eskimo. I mean, that goes across the board. Desecration of the dead, like I was just watching this YouTube video today where the guy was talking about a World War One veteran who was buried like a month ago. He was dug up and strewn about a street with like his clothes that he was buried in, sprinkled, littered across, leaving a path to find the guy's body just in some random parking lot. And it turned out that it was actually the military that did it as a prank. These things happen. Desecration of the dead is highly frowned upon. And so those guys were like jailed, kicked out of the military for sure. As Frank Edwards summarized the case, evidently the village of about 30 inhabitants had been pursuing its normal way of life when for some reason they rushed out of their huts and none of them ever got back from whatever had attracted their attention. For reasons unknown, the inhabitants of the village, men, women, and children, had left it, willingly or unwillingly. In the dead of early winter, skilled trackers failed to find any trail if they had fled over the tundra. The presence of their battered kayaks was mute evidence that they had not ventured out into the lake. Months of patient and far-flung investigation failed to produce a single trace of any member who had lived in the deserted village of Anjakuni. Hey, but you know what? Where did this take place? It's at the far north country, right? Is that Canada? Is that, did I miss that? Eskimos. Alaska? Let's say Alaska. I mean, you know how they treat the natives of the land there. Police don't give a damn, dude. Like, it's sad to say, it's sad to hear. You hate hearing these stories, but you hear it time and time again, how people get kidnapped, or, you know, if they're indigenous people, the cops just put them on the back burner. They don't really try to investigate what happened. And most of the time, it's the cops doing it. Like, they'll kidnap somebody, drive them off to some deserted, frozen land, and let them just fend for themselves. And most of the time, like 99% of the time, they never make it out alive. And yeah, there's stories of that. But I'm not a true crime person. I do listen to true crime, but that's not what I'm presenting here. These are just things that go bump in the night. Now, where was I? Volume 32 of the British Journal of the Society for Physical Research carries statements from Mr. and Mrs. Clifford H. Pye in regard to a house that disappeared. All right, here we go. Let's talk about the house. I'm curious because I wonder about the plumbing again. The Pyes were on a vacation trip traveling by bus when they sighted an attractive house on the outskirts of Boscastle on the coast of northern Cornwall. According to Clifford Pye's statement, the bus had stopped to let off a passenger almost outside of the gate. A rather substantial house standing on the left-hand side of the road. It stood back from the road some 20 yards or so. The house was double-fronted and of a style of architecture which I judged to date from the late 1860s. Oh, okay, so it sounds like this might be a ghost house of some sort. Or early 1870s. Makes no difference. It had a fresh, trim appearance and seemed to have been recently painted. The most striking feature, however, was on the lawn where, amongst beds of scarlet geraniums, there were several wicker or cane chairs or tables over which there were standing large garden umbrellas of black and orange. Okay, that's something straight out of like Alice in Wonderland when they're playing chess, the human chess, right? That happened on that movie, right? I don't know. I haven't seen that movie since I was like in 6th grade. Mr. and Mrs. Pye saw no one on the grounds and saw no sign identifying the place as a hotel, but they had no doubt that such was the case. Mrs. Pye expressed the sentiment that both of them shared. The place was just what they were looking for in a guest house for their stay in Boscastle. Look, you can't just look at a house and assume it's a motel. You know what I mean? You just can't go in assuming that kind of stuff, man. That's how you get shot. But when the Pies went back to the guest house to book rooms, they found just empty fields running across the cliffs. Okay, so it looks like the house disappeared. Or maybe they took a wrong turn somewhere. It happens. According to Clifford Pye, during our stay, we made a thorough search of the locality but failed to find any place remotely resembling that we had seen. On a subsequent visit to the Travelga guest house, I told our experience to the proprietor, who assured me that from his knowledge, there was in the neighborhood no such house as I described. Author Edmund P. Gibson, in referring to the case, wrote that the strange experience might best be explained as a collective hallucination engendered by the Pies' wish to find a suitable place for their vacation. Look, I've been on vacation before, and I can't tell you how many times we've driven past a shady looking Motel 6 that I did not want to stay at. And I never once hallucinated with my partner that there was a grand motel that we could stay at. And then we circled back and it disappeared. Like, that's never happened. I don't know. If that's happened to you, drop it in the comments. Although Gibson theorizes that one of the couple might have conjured the place up in the subconscious and the other might have viewed it telepathically, he admits that to call the incident a collective hallucination describes what occurred but does not explain it. There is no evidence that any such house ever stood on the site noted, so it cannot be called a ghost house unless it was displaced in space. Yet there must have been some underlying cause in the subconscious minds of the Pies that caused this vision to be seen at the same time by both. Did the Pies have a collective vision, or did some underlying cause in the subconscious minds permit them to view another dimension, another reality which sits somewhere on the edge of our own? Mr. R.W. Balcom of Live Oak, California, contributed a personal experience shared with his wife to the September 1968 issue of Fate magazine. According to Mr. Balcom, the two of them were traveling to Lake Tahoe during the early morning hours, a few miles east of Placerville on Highway 50. They stopped to eat at a quaint and rustic-styled restaurant, which neither of them had ever noticed on any of their previous trips to the region. I mean, look, sometimes restaurants pop up, especially back then. Maybe they had some good workers back then, People can build houses, people could build restaurants like nothing. Well, let's see where the story takes us. The food was excellent, and the waitress and cook were so friendly that the Balcoms truly meant their promise to stop back again. They tried to do so on their return drive from the Lake Tahoe, but the restaurant was nowhere to be seen. The Balcoms traveled that route 3 successive weekends in 1962, searching for the friendly little restaurant with the good food that had simply vanished into nothingness. Okay, did they check for the plumbing though? I mean, did they look for foundation and see pipes strewn about? I don't know why the plumbing gets me so worked up in these kind of stories. Since then, we have journeyed over Highway 50 to Lake Tahoe many times, Balcom concludes, never again finding the little restaurant. Did the Balcoms have the same kind of collective hallucination that the Clifford Pies shared? Or were both couples subconsciously tuned to enter the higher or lower vibratory rate of another dimension? Look, I know I've been to a restaurant. I cannot think of the name of it, but I've been to San Antonio many times. I've been to Austin like twice. And I went to this one restaurant, and I cannot tell you what city it was in, but it was really good. And these are two places that one place I'm very familiar with, and the other not so much, but I can't remember where or what the name even was of this restaurant. These things happen. You take trips and then you find a special spot and then you forget it. You go back looking for it again and you forget where it was. that's not out of the ordinary, but let's just assume this guy knows what he's talking about, and that makes it scary. Lois B. Tracy told of the night in 1934 when she was driving with her family on a stretch of road between Bartow and Fort Meade, Florida, when the Model T Ford in front of them drifted sideways off the road and into the swamp and disappeared. My father jammed on the brakes. We could not understand what happened, she writes Fate in June 1964. The car had not driven off the road, but just had drifted sideways. We pointed our headlights into the swamp and looked with flashlights, but we could find no sign of the car. Frances E. Peterson of Keokuk, Iowa, remembered the Sunday afternoon in 1935 when she and her husband and their 4 children were returning from a weekend visit in Missouri. They decided to take a shortcut on a dirt road. They drove down a hill into a valley. Then, as they reached the rim of the valley, they were astonished to see a well where women in sunbonnets and long full skirts covered by large aprons were drawing in a wooden pail by a windlass? What the hell is a windlass? Look, these are 1935 terminologies. I don't know what a windlass is. Other women were carrying the water in pails balanced on wood yokes across their shoulders. Bearded men who were tending sheep and gathering wood wore loose-fitting trousers, smocks, and large black hats. Okay, were these like Amish people? It sounds Amish to me. I mean, we've been living most of our lives living in the Amish paradise, right? I'm not the only one. The Petersons had never heard of such a settlement in the area of St. Patrick, Missouri, and as it turned out, no one else had either. Okay, they're in Missouri. I feel like that would be Amish country. I mean, Pennsylvania for sure, right? But why not Missouri? Many times since then, we have looked for this lovely old world settlement. Mrs. Peterson commented, "We have inquired of old settlers and relatives in the area, but no one knows of such a valley. Did we ride backward in time?" And that was in Fate, April 1959. The men and women who have had the experiences cited above will always wonder whether or not they had some kind of collective psychic experience, or whether their physical bodies somehow managed to pass into another dimension. What? For the individuals, the answer becomes a bit more clearly stated, although no more clearly defined or explained, for they were left with undeniable physical evidence that they had been confronted with some force as yet beyond the grasp of orthodox science. At about 2 p.m. on Tuesday, April 17, 1951, Mrs. Ernest Harrelson was working in her farm home south of Georgetown, South Carolina, when she heard a peculiar sound overhead. She had no time to puzzle out the sound before it climaxed with a loud ripping sound. Mrs. Harrelson dashed out her front door to see a shower of shingles and bits of lumber dropping out of the sky. More than half the roof had been torn off an unoccupied tenant house across the road and a bit west of the Harrelson home. Walter S. McDonald, writing in the Charleston, South Carolina News and Courier for April 24, 1951, stated, "The single section of the roof which did not fall to the rear lies to the right and front of the house, some 50 feet away, while the remainder is scattered over an area of about 150 by 100 feet at the back. There were no signs of burns, and the floor was undamaged except where the chimney fell through. There were many tin and wood shingles scattered about individually, but some small sections of the roof were included in the debris. Small timbers of the roof were broken apart cleanly, as if snapped in half by a powerful force. Yet no one could identify that powerful force. Roofs of buildings, barns, unfortunate men, women, and children may have been claimed by some as yet unidentified force, or these people and things may have been somehow translated into another dimension. Okay, I read that. I don't know what it. I don't comprehend what that last paragraph was, but I think it said that a building just exploded, maybe. So that creeped me out, man. Walking into other dimensions and stuff. There's more stories like that, and that was just one section of being teleported from like Argentinian, and I think Brazil. I think all these people going to Mexico, ending up in Mexico somehow, some way, is pretty creepy because I went to school with a lot of people who are very familiar with Mexico for one reason or another. And they would always tell me the stories, the superstitions, the myths, the legend that they heard about when they were in Mexico or from their families that were in Mexico. And I know it's a very ultra like religious area where they believe heavily in saints and the Bible and all that stuff. Even witchcraft, they call it brujeria. It gets creepy. Maybe because they believe more heavily there, that's where all of these weird phenomenal events took place. That's where people would end up. I don't know. I can't account for it. I enjoy reading these stories. I enjoy hearing about these legends, and they creep me out. And I don't know. Maybe they creeped you out. Let me know what you thought. So, anyways, I'll catch you on the flip side. Peace out, y'all.